How's that? There you go. That's better. Okay, last week we started talking about Zwingli. Zwingli had two followers, two disciples. What were their names that are going to start the Anabaptist movement? Anybody remember? No? Weren't here? You get to, yeah. Y'all going to have to step it up because we didn't have the Presleys with us. So. Very good. Good job, Susan. Yes. Felix Manz and Conrad Grebel. Okay, they were followers of Zwingli. However, they did not think that Zwingli went far enough, particularly along the subject of baptism. Yes, that's right. So they thought and they believed that baptism was for the believer. Now, of all the Protestant denominations we've covered so far that have sprung up from the Reformation, nobody yet has challenged baptism. We've talked an awful lot about the Lord's Supper, but we haven't challenged baptism of the infant yet. Remember, the Catholic Church started doing infant baptism very early on, like 300 to 500 AD. And so by the time we get to the 1500s, it is a practice that has been done for 1,000 years, unchallenged by anybody. Okay? And while Luther would come to the point, he would be forced to argue about this, he would come to the conclusion that infant baptism did not convey salvation to the infant, but it still ought to be done. Even still today, Lutherans do infant baptism, although they say it's more just a ceremonial dedication than any real significance, right? They kind of say it's a symbolic dedication of the baby to the Lord. Yes? Yes. The Catholics were baptizing for salvation. They believed that if the baby died before it was baptized, that it went to hell. And even still today, I believe they still, in the dark corners of the Catholic Church, will still preach that. It's not something they're going to stand in the pulpit and preach a sermon on, but it is something that they will say. Okay. Any questions about this so far? We got the stage is set for another branch of the Reformation here. All right, let's talk about Manz and Grebel then. Okay. All right. In 1522, Conrad Grebel, he's the founder of the Swiss Anabaptist movement. He's born of an influential practitioner, doctor. Family received good education at the universities of Vienna and Paris. And after his conversion in 1522, he worked closely with Zwingli until he broke with him in 1525. Zwingli's early view that infant baptism held no biblical warrant had appealed to him. And in 1525, Zurich Council ordered Grebel and Manz, Felix Manz, another well-educated Anabaptist leader, to desist holding meetings and Bible study. Okay, so remember, how does it work inside the Swiss cantons? They have a big town hearing where they debate the issues, and then the city council votes as to who won. And whoever won, their ideas can continue to be taught and preached. And if you lost, you got a cease and desist order, right? So that happened, and Grebel and Manz got the desist order. They were told to stop having meetings and stop having their Bible studies. Another person by the name of George Blaurock, we'll go with that, in 1525 was baptized by Grebel, and then he baptized Grebel and several others, right? So this is the part that I kept joking with you guys about the Mississippi Squirrel Revival where they're baptizing each other. That's this instance where this happens, okay? Remember, adult baptism was not practiced anywhere, nowhere, until these guys just did it in 1525, okay? It had been that lost under the Catholic doctrine and Catholic Church. Okay, so they baptized each other, and then they baptized some more people who had come to the same conclusion. Because insistence on believers' baptisms would deprive many of the franchise, Zwingli gave up on his earlier stand on the lack of spiritual foundation for infant baptism. The more radical Anabaptists who opposed state control of religion were also endangering his plans for enlisting the slow-moving conservative authorities on the side of the reform. At first, Zwingli was willing to use his technique of debate to persuade them to give up their views, but When this failed, the council adopted stronger measures, such as fines and exile. The movement was practically non-existent in Zurich by 1535 because of the cruel treatment, and the lowly Christians fled to the other lands. The Amish, led by Jacob Ammon, who broke with the Swiss Brethren, emerged in Zurich. About 120,000 people later went to Pennsylvania and became good farmers in their adopted land. Okay, so again, another common theme we're seeing here. Because of the religious wars taking place in Europe, the 30 Years' War, the persecution of all these different types, these people and their whole communities, like they're moving as churches, guys. Their whole church would get up and get on a boat and jump the pond and come over here, right? And over here, there's plenty of land, and you have, as a result of that, you have what we would come to call the melting pot, right? You have all these different religions showing up. You got Lutheranism, you got Calvinism, you got the Anabaptist movement. Now we have the Amish showing up, right? So the three branches of Anabaptists that still exist today, I think, let's see if I can get all three of them. Two of them, at least, the biggest ones, are the Amish, which are still around, right? We know those guys riding around on horses, buggies, still today. And then the Mennonites, okay? Don't know if you've ever encountered many Mennonites, but they're kind of like Amish light, right? They're willing to use technologies and things like that, but they're still very, very, very strict and legalistic on many things, okay? All right. Here's a name for your kid. You ready? Name your Joey. Joey. Name your kid this, okay, when you have a kid one day. You ready? Balthazar Hubmaier. Got it? Name your kid that. When you're holding your little baby, go Balthazar Hubmaier, okay? All right, so Balthazar Hubmaier was one of the early German Anabaptists and had an excellent education and received a Doctor of Theology degree from the University of Ingolstadt? We'll go with that, some German town. All right, where he studied under Luther's opponent, John Eck. He became a pastor near the Swiss border, and that gave him contact with the Swiss radicals and the Anabaptists, whose ideas he adopted. He and 300 followers were baptized by Fuchsian in 1525, and then he had to flee to Zurich to escape the Austrian authorities. From there, he was banished to Moravia, where he assumed leadership of those who fled from the Zwinglian persecution in Zurich. Okay, so long story short, Catholics and Protestants don't like each other. Okay, the Catholics and the Lutherans hate each other. The Catholics and the Reformed people hate each other. The Reformed and the Lutherans, they kind of get along, but everybody hates the Anabaptists, right? Nobody likes them. All right, and there's some reasons for that. Some big pillars of the Anabaptist movement that are going to show up. Obviously, baptism, right? First and foremost, baptism is for the believer, okay? That's what, on the religious side, on the spiritual side, that's what's going to separate them from the rest of the people. Now, here's what that does. This also takes church involvement and makes it voluntary instead of mandated. That make sense? So now we get to a point with the Anabaptists that church involvement in the church is now voluntary instead of mandated. With Luther, with Calvin, and especially with the Catholic Church, church involvement is mandatory. You are expected to be there when the sermons are being preached, and if they're not there, you're going to be fined for it. And if you're not there, eventually, if you keep missing, we're going to throw you in jail, right? Like this was common standard practice with all the other branches. Do what? Oh, man, yeah, we'd be good to go, wouldn't we? Okay, and their the way they would say that, well, this is how you're part of the church, you know how they would do that? It's like, well, you were baptized as Catholic. You were baptized as Lutheran. You were baptized as Reformed. Therefore, you need to be in said church come service time, right? And by the way, their services were not just Sunday morning. Most of them, as we talked about before, they had services every day of the week, okay? So this becomes a thing with the Anabaptists. One of the big things that they're going to bring in is church attendance and participation is voluntary. Now, if that sounds familiar, guess what? It is. This is one of the ideas that we stuck with and we kept with here, okay? And here comes the next big idea, which this is obviously going to play a huge role for us here in the United States. They also believed very firmly that the state and the church were to be separate, okay? That they were to not interfere with each other. So, yes, essentially their stance on the church and the state is just about where we are at our church here today, right? Which is, yeah, you can go vote, and yeah, you can, have your role and to play in the politics that God has given you. That's fine. But as far as an actual church trying to take control of the means of government, we're not going to do that, right? Which is what, up until the time, have been done for over 1,000 years, right? With the Catholics, with the Lutherans, and with the Reformed, all of those churches had control over the levers of power in politics and the government, okay? All of them. So they were huge on that idea. And then the third one, which is also part of the reason that made them such an easy target, is that they were pacifist, okay? With the exception of one branch that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But they were pacifists. So they would read in the scripture where Jesus says, turn the other cheek. They would, see the passages where Jesus says, those who live by the sword die by the sword, so on and so forth. And they decided that to be a military figure, to be a soldier, to be someone engaged in warfare was sinful. That's not what Jesus would want us to do. That's not what he asked his followers to do. Therefore, they were a big thing with the Anabaptists is that they were pacifists. They did not believe that they had a role to play in wars. They did believe that they had a role to play in helping people that were injured and things like that. So this is, what's the name of the movie that Mel Gibson just made about the Seventh-day Adventist guy? Hacksaw Ridge, right? Did y'all watch that? Well, it's a few years old. It's younger than Braveheart, which was, All right, yeah. Hacksaw Ridge was about a Seventh-day Adventist in World War II, right? Who wound up getting the Medal of Honor, even though he refused to carry a weapon, okay? So the Anabaptists would align pretty well with that, right? Like we can go into war, but we'll go into war to provide aid and to help those who are wounded and things like that. We're not going to go fight to kill other people. Which, of course, makes them a big, easy target while the rest of Europe is at war, right? And so that's why they would become hated by the rest, okay? This also causes problems with governments, obviously. If the governments have control over the church, then obviously they don't want to lose control of the church by these people saying that the church should be totally separate from the government, right? And then they develop problems with the Reformed guys, with the Calvinists, because the Calvinists have theocracies set up everywhere where they're the ones that are in control of the government. So they just find themselves opposed. They find enemies on all sides, is what they do. And then I guess we should talk about, let's go ahead and talk about what happens in Münster, I guess. Book gets there. Well, we'll get there. Okay, so we got Balthasar Hubmaier. Okay, we talked about him. Remember, Joey, name that your kid. Go ahead and write it down. Okay? All right. All right, the radical fringe of the Anabaptist movement, because of their eschatology, helped to discredit many sound believers in the ranks of the Anabaptists in Germany. There were these, they called them the Zwickau prophets, we'll go with that, who caused Luther trouble in 1522 in Wittenberg, were often, though perhaps mistakenly, associated with the movement to discredit it. The Münster Rebellion in 1535 led some radical Anabaptists to be alienated from Luther, and others followed these people. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. Town called Münster. Zoom in on it for me, Dakota. This is where Münster is. Y'all see it? All right, zoom up. Keep zooming. Boom. All right, stop. What's just to the northwest of Münster? Can you read it? It's the Netherlands, right? Okay? And the Netherlands has already kind of became a safe haven for Protestants, right? They're running from the Catholics, and the Netherlands is a safe place. A lot of the English Protestants would run to the Netherlands whenever Bloody Mary would come back to power and try to make England Catholic again. Okay, from there's going to be a man. Let me find his name here. Well, let's go here. Bernd Rothman, all right? One of the canons of the Cathedral of Münster began an effort to win Münster to the evangelical faith. And in 1532, the council allowed Lutheran ministers to man the pulpits, but the emperor ordered the Bishop of Münster to drive out Rothman and his followers, for they were becoming increasingly radical, adopting Anabaptist ideas of socialism and proposing to sell property to aid the poor. At this point, Melchior Hoffman, who arrived in Strasbourg in 1529 to await the coming of the millennium in 1533, was superseded as the leaders in Strasbourg. So there was this guy by the name of Hoffman. He had decided that he figured out when Jesus was coming back, and he'd also figured out that Strasbourg was going to be the New Jerusalem, right? So of all the places in the world, we're going to pick a German city called Strasbourg. Well, turns out that he was wrong. Who knew? And the funny thing is, we're looking back at this 500 years later. Turns out that he was wrong. However, after he dies, his followers move on, and they gather around a guy by the name of John Mathis would be his name. And so John Mathis proclaims to be Enoch and sent emissaries to Münster in 1534. Later, he decided that Münster, not Strasbourg, would be the site of the New Jerusalem and the millennial reign of Christ. So he moved there to Münster with his wife. And when Mathis was killed in fighting, John Leyden succeeded him and married his wife and the 15 other wives that he had acquired over this time. So the book is not giving us a good description of what happens here. Long story short, these people move into Münster who have decided that they know when Christ is coming back, and they take control of the town, of the city, through the preaching, through sidewalk preaching, even through the main cathedral in town. They wind up running off the Catholics and running off everybody else who didn't align with their beliefs, right? And so it really is a David Koresh type situation, except for instead of it being a little compound, it's a whole city filled full of thousands of people. So it starts with John Mathis, okay? Starts with him. He's going to come in, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to start getting rid of dissenters, right? So anybody who doesn't recognize John Mathis as Enoch, and anybody who doesn't recognize him as one of the prophets of the Lord sent to come and tell about the coming end times, which is upon us, then you can leave town or we can kill you. It's up to you. And by the way, when you leave town, you're leaving your stuff, right? Conveniently. So they do that. All right, well, they proclaim that this is the New Jerusalem. And so, as you can imagine, all the crazy kooks from all across Europe, where do they start coming to? Münster. Hey, guys, the world's ending. New Jerusalem is going to be Münster. Guess where we want to be? We've read the book of Revelation at this point in our own language. Let's get there before things get bad. And so all of these crazy people start to assemble in Münster, right? And word gets out all across Europe about this new theocracy that has taken over this German city, which is not a small city. It's a major city at the time, and it's also well fortified. So the Catholics hear about this, and the Protestants hear about this, and they actually stop killing each other and put together an army of Catholics and Protestants to go lay siege to the city. The siege lasts 16 months. You with me? So for over a year, the Catholic army, it's led by Catholics, so they call it Catholic, but there are plenty of Protestants in there too. They besiege the city. And of course, the purpose in a siege is to hold them out, or to siege them out until the supplies run low and they starve to death, right? That's the goal of sieges. And generally, you do that because you don't have enough manpower to take over the walls. And if you look at the walls, maybe he can pull up a picture, I don't know. But the walls in Münster were massive. It's a Gothic-style city, so it was real big. Real big walls. So they decided to wait for the people inside to starve to death, okay? Well, it turns out that the way that John Mathis would die, it turns out that him being Enoch and being besieged so long and being very, very crazy, And it turns out that, hey, when all the nations of Europe are coming together against you to wipe you out, it kind of fits together with this whole New Jerusalem teaching, doesn't it? And the return of Christ in the book of Revelation. So on an Easter Sunday, the year that they were sieged, on Easter Sunday, he decided him and a few others are going to ride out and go break the siege because Jesus and his angels are going to arrive and help them destroy the sieging army, right? So that's what they do. They go outside the gates, they're riding out, and they're promptly all shot and killed, and they all die, okay? So that marks how John Mathis meets his end. One of the things that happens because of the siege is that there's so many men dying in the city that the demographics of the city are flipped upside down. The women highly outnumber the men, and as a result of that, that's where the polygamy stuff comes in. They say, well, look, we got all these ladies around here, and we only got a handful of guys left that are still fighting, and so they need to be married, and we need to, keep things going around here. And so, again, at the time of his death, John Mathis had 15 additional wives, right? So, yeah. And that, by the way, this isn't the last time that's going to show up. That's going to keep showing up throughout the radical cultish side of Christianity for the next several hundred years. So after Mathis is killed, they cut off his head, they take his head, put it on a pike right outside the city gates, just so that the people inside the city can look at it every now and then. The person who takes over after he is killed, his name is John Leyden. He succeeds him, marries his wives. Polygamy was decreed because of a large surplus of unmarried women in Munster and based on the practice of some Old Testament patriarchs. So our buddy John Leyden here is going to say that he is not Enoch, of course, because that was Mathis. So John Leyden is, in fact, David, right? That's who he decides he is. And well, since David had many wives, so can he. So he gets to get a lot of wives too. Based on the practice, and they base this on the Old Testament patriarchs as their basis for legalizing polygamy. Community of good, so we're practicing some communism showing up here. And a fanatical anticipation of the coming of the heavenly kingdom led to disorder. The bishop of the area, aided by a large fighting force and by treachery in the Anabaptist ranks, recaptured the city, and the Anabaptist leaders were executed. Okay, so after they're executed, once they kill all these guys, these leaders, they torture. First off, it wasn't just a clean execution. They torture them in the public square. The good old thing with, running the screws through the thumbs and nails through the tongue and all that good stuff. They do all this stuff publicly. And then they take them and they put their bodies in cages. They then raise the cages up upon the cathedral in Munster. Dakota, show us these cages as they stand today. Still there in 2026. How about that? I think they did actually go and get the bones out of the cages, though, so they did do that. But yes, those cages are still there today, raised up above the city on top of the cathedral. And unless you've got a really high-powered camera, you can't even see it, can you? So, if anyone ever wants to go to Munster, there it is. All right. Well, as you can imagine, this would brand the Anabaptist movement as a bunch of crazy kooks, right? The Calvinists are like, these guys are really crazy, stay away from them. The Lutherans are like, these guys are really, really crazy, stay away from them. And the Catholics are like, hey, where's our steaks? We need more, right? We got more burning to do. So that is going to become the giant stain on the Anabaptist movement, is what happens in Munster. The leaders of the Anabaptist movement, Felix Manz, Conrad Grebel, those guys, and Balthasar Hubmaier would have 100% denounced, if they had lived long enough, what happened in Munster, right? So it's a movement that is hijacked by these radical people who think they figured out when Jesus is coming back. Okay? All right. So what happens to the leftovers, right? First off, most of the people in the city were killed. There was very little quarter shown. The one group of people that were spared were pregnant women. Everybody else was either executed or sold into slavery. Okay? Some of their favorite things to do to the Anabaptists, we've already talked about this, they thought it was pretty comical to drown them because they were big about rebaptizing, right? Well, we're going to baptize you again. Here's a rock. They were big on that, okay? All right. Where does that leave us? Let's see. Yeah. Do what? Is that what they called it when they threw him over with the rocks? Yeah, the third baptism? Yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right. All right. So the wreckage of the Anabaptist movement by Münster was averted by the same leadership of the Minnow Simons in the Netherlands, okay? So again, remember, the Anabaptists still exist today in the form of the Amish and the Mennonites, all right? And there is a large collection of those guys to the northeast. What? Hutterites, yeah, that's the third one that's not as popular. Okay, yeah, Jacob Hutter, we're about to talk about him right now, all right? They would go to the Netherlands and then ultimately jump across the pond, across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States, all right? They had embraced the Anabaptist views and had given up, let's see, hold on, let me tell you, we're talking about Minnow Simons. So he embraces the Anabaptist views, gives up his priesthood in the Roman Catholic Church in 1536. He assumed the leadership of the quote-unquote brethren, the name that the Anabaptists of the Netherlands adopted in order to get rid of the stigma attached to the name Anabaptist. After his death, the brethren were known as Mennonites. They were finally granted freedom of religion in 1676. Persecution drove them to Prussia, then to Russia, and at the invitation of Catherine the Great, many later migrated to North and South America. Okay, so that follows their track. Because there were so many different Anabaptist groups with slightly different variations in belief, variations that grew out of this instance on believers' right to interpret the Bible as literal and as the literal and final authority, is difficult to give an organized statement of the Anabaptist beliefs. However, there were some doctrines that all Anabaptists held in common. They insisted on the authority of the Bible as the final, infallible rule for faith and practice, right? So, hey, we agree with that. Check. Many of them gave it literal interpretation. We do that too, right? Just about in every instance we can, the Bible is to be taken literal. They believed that the pure church was to be a free association of regenerated rather than a state church with some unsaved in it. Okay? That's what we talked about as far as the separation of church and state. Remember, the Reformed nations in Europe, everybody went to church. The Lutheran nations in Europe, everybody went to church. Now, did they assume that everybody there was believers? No. They knew that some people there weren't believers, but they still wanted them to go anyways so that they could hear the word, right? That was the idea. Whereas the Anabaptists believe that church is not mandated, it's voluntary, okay? They wanted the church to be a body of believers, not a mixed body of believers and non-believers under the control of the state. If that sounds familiar, that's because we also believe that today, okay? All right. See. Yeah, so the church was to be a free association of the regenerated, in other words, of the saved, rather than the state church with some unsaved in it. Most of them insisted on the complete separation of church and state and would have nothing to do with state churches. Okay? They also practiced the baptism of believers. Let's see. By immersion. All right, that was another big thing. So baptism is for believers and by immersion. Their opposition to infant baptism as unscriptural and their insistence on rebaptism gave them the name Anabaptist. In the, Schleittheim Confession? I don't know. You want to have a go at this, teachers? Here. Yeah? Okay, let's see. Okay, perfect. Go for that. Good, I'm not an idiot. Schleittheim? Okay, I feel like there's a in there, right? We'll just add that in there somewhere. Schleittheim. How about that? That sounds better. That sounds much more official. Okay. So in their confession of 1527, mainly the work of Michael Sadler, expressed the major ideas of the Anabaptists. Some were inclined to pacifism, we talked about that, and objected to the taking of oaths. This is another big thing. 0 oaths were to be taken to anything except for to Jesus. Okay? So if we had to swear upon the Bible to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but truth, nope, not doing that. If we had to take an oath to enter the military service, nope, not doing that. Any oath that would be taken would be forbidden by the Anabaptists. Okay? Your only oath that you were to give was to Jesus and to him alone. That was a big thing to them. Particularly, this caused problems when it came to them serving as magistrates, right? An oath of office, right? All right. Some of them were millennialarians, okay, in their view of the future, partly because of that practiced by the community of goods. They wanted to have restitution and the return of the church to biblical purity and to Christ in true discipleship. So, by and large, we agree with just about everything that the Anabaptist statement of faith are going to say. What we obviously disagree with is what happened in Munster, right? And Munster would be the giant talking point that all the other branches of Christianity would bring up over and over and over again, right? So anytime that an Anabaptist would stand up and try to say, well, we believe the Scripture says this, their opponent would say, yeah, but look what happened in Munster, and those are Anabaptists too, and you're one of them, right? And so it became a real big stain on them, right? So the Anabaptists appealed particularly to the workers and to the peasants, who were not reached by the other reformers. This fact, coupled with the frequent tendency to the literal interpretation of the Bible by ignorant men, often led to mystical and charismatic excesses. The hard times of the 16th century led many of the lower class to accept consolidation they found in the views of the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists were not the Bolsheviks of the Reformation, nor were all of them left-wing fanatical visionaries. They were simple Bible-believing people, some of whom were led astray by ignorant leaders who interpreted the Bible literally to their own advantage. Neither the Mennonites nor the Baptists should be ashamed to count them among their spiritual ancestors. Their free church concept influenced the Puritans, the Separatists, the Baptists, and the Quakers in the New World. So, that's our heritage, all right? Questions? Yes, there would be a large group of them that would move to Moravia. Moravia is what we would consider Eastern Germany today, right? Moravia? Yeah. Yeah, former Czechoslovakia. Okay, and what are they called? Moravians? They call themselves Moravians? Okay, I'm curious if that's more of a religious identity or a national identity. More religious? Okay, cool. It's interesting how if we go to the east, a lot of those blocks are still in existence today. Like we talked about what was our group from southern France? The Waldenses and the Huguenots and all those guys. There's still little packs of them over there in the eastern side. Yeah. They didn't make it out west, I guess. Yeah? Well, yeah, so obviously almost all of these faiths are basically non-existent in Europe now, right? Europe is one of the most secular or just agnostic places in the world now. So, and that's 400 years later, you know. So. Quakers and the Amish, they're pretty similar. We would have to jump in to find out where the differences are in doctrine if you want to, but they're pretty close to the same vein as, you know, very strict, very Puritan in the sense, you know. That's a good question. Who were they? Which two presidents were Quakers? Nixon and Hoover were Quakers? Well, that's interesting. You know, technically Trump is a Presbyterian, but I don't think you could tell us what a Presbyterian is. Well, so he identified that for most of his adult life, and then he took the easy cop out, and now he identifies as non-denominational, I think. Yeah. Okay. Did he take an oath of office? There you go. How about that? Think we all just learned something new? So he didn't take an oath of office. He took an affirmation. You know, we found some. We can find some ways around this, some loopholes. Okay. All right. We have any questions about these guys, about the Anabaptists? Hated by all, only loved by each other. That's what sums them up. Can you see how these ideas that are showing up in the Reformation are going to be put together to form our country? You'll see how these ideas start playing massive roles in this. From the ideas with the Reformed faith giving us the idea of an elder-led governmental system, which would eventually develop into republic, like a representative republic idea, which is what we are. Newsflash, we're not a democracy, we're a representative republic here. The Anabaptists certainly give us ideas of separation of church and state. And certainly all of these guys are ready for some religious freedom by the time they come to the New World. Right? These things are huge. What time is it? Oh man, 15 minutes early? Shoot. Let's see what else we got here. We got some mystics. Those are always fun. We can talk about those guys. A guy by the name of Caspar Schwenkelfeld. You know what, Joey? Name your kid that. Caspar Schwenkelfeld. All right. These guys were more experientially oriented. In other words, oriented on their experience and not on the scripture. This would probably give birth to our modern day charismatic movement with the tongue speaking and pew flipping and all that stuff. And they were inclined towards mysticism, so they believed that they were receiving private revelation from God, which is exactly what they do today. And believed in inner spiritual guidance by the Holy Spirit. A small group of these people still exist in Pennsylvania today. All right, so there you go. You got some mystics. Yeah. Okay. We did this backward. We all covered Calvin already. Anybody got any more questions about all this? Yes. Yeah, way before. Anybody know who the founder of modern Baptists are? There's a casino named after him. He would not be happy about it. I believe a certain fellow by the name of William Rogers. Huh? Look him up. Let's be sure I'm telling you right here. Tell you wrong. That sounds familiar. It's because he also plays. Roger Williams. It's Roger Williams? Okay. Sorry, dyslexia. Okay, Roger Williams, born in 1603, died in 1683. He's an Englishman, a theologian, and author. He's the author of the Providence Plantations, which became the colony of Rhode Island. Yes, there you go. That's that guy, right? That Roger Williams. Yeah, let me read that again. Founder of the Providence Plantations, which became the colony of Rhode Island, and Providence Plantations, and later the state of Rhode Island, which was a staunch advocate for religious liberty and separation of church and state, and fair dealings with the natives. He was expelled by the Puritan leaders from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he established Providence Plantations in 1636 as a refugee, offering what he termed liberty of conscience, making Rhode Island the first government in the Western world to guarantee religious freedom in its founding charter. His ideas on religious tolerance and civil government directly influenced the principles later enshrined in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. He became a Baptist. In 1638, he founded First Baptist Church in America in Providence. He then moved beyond organized religion and became a quote-unquote seeker who did not identify with any specific church. Williams studied the language of the New England Native Americans and published the first book-length study of it in English. There you go. So, yeah, he would play a major role in our branch of the Reformation that would come along. So, let's see, what was his dates? It was 1603, is that what we said when he was born? Let me go back. 1638, okay. All of this stuff is happening in Europe. Yeah, so the Reformation, 1517 is the start, and the conclusion of this time period is 1648. So he's right in the middle of it. Colonies, right? So. All right. We can move on to the New World probably next week. I think we're done with Europe. Had enough of those guys. Yeah? Talked about Henry. There was one instance. Let me see if I can Google the guy's name real quick. This is a funny, I say funny, it's not really funny, but it's ironic. How about that? Here we go. All right, so there's a guy by the name of Derek Willems, right? He's Dutch, and he's an Anabaptist, and he was running from a officer who was trying to catch him, and let's see, he escaped. But then he turned back to rescue his pursuer who had fallen in a frozen river. He fell through thin ice, right? While he was chasing him. And then after he saved him, because he saved him, he was recaptured. And then he was killed for his beliefs. That happened. So we'll have a fun discussion on whether or not he should have turned around. William Rogers? Or Roger, was it Roger Williams? See, we did it again. Probably born in Massachusetts Bay. Let's see. Google it for me. I do know this, that the mark of early Baptists in the United States would be as missionaries to the Indians. That was a big deal. He was born in London, so he hopped on a boat, came across the pond. Yep, London, England. 1603, died in 1683. Man, it's even got a picture of his signature. How about that? Now we're really getting up to date. It sounds like he kind of got around a little bit, didn't he? You're going to go from Anglican to Puritan to Baptist. Yeah. And then not even stick with them by the end of his life, right? He agreed with the rejection of infant baptism. Oh boy. They got a picture of that? That's going to be something to see. I guess he turned into an apple tree. All right, so we know if we ever go to Munster, Germany, that we need to look for those cages, all right? You know, for some cages that are really old, they look like they're in pretty good shape for 400 years old. Just saying. They probably do. Who wants that job? You want to go up to the top of that cathedral and paint those cages? At least they finally took the bones out of them, I guess, you know. Yeah, that's probably true. By the way, the Catholics would retake the city and it would stay primarily Catholic. So, what's crazy is that building managed to survive both world wars. Thought about that? Think of all the bombings that happened and all that. It's been there the whole time. All right. Well, who wants to dismiss us in prayer if we don't have any other questions? Brother Alonzo, go for it.